watersheds are responding to change, and the kind of work that we do in my lab and across the community of what I'll introduce to you as critical zone scientists. And so a little bit about me. My background is in engineering. I did my undergrad at UT in part in hydrogeology in the Jackson School where I now am, which is pretty amazing. And I'm a Texan. And I went to California for 10 years and did my master's and PhD, and then came right back to start this job. But I have training, starting in kind of petroleum engineering into groundwater and then into geomorphology or landscape evolution, and geophysics. And so I have a kind of diverse background that I bring, and I'll talk to you today mostly about trees. So you'll see that we necessarily in the hydrologic sciences have to integrate across a lot of different fields to understand the Earth system. And I hope that by showing you how we do that integration in the research sphere, you can draw connections between the different units that you're about to cover. My understanding is you're going to cover things like sedimentology and hydrology. And so my research really integrates these things. So hopefully you'll have some cool examples. And of course, I have to say, this is the most important slide of the whole talk, is that I have not done very much of the work that I'm going to show you. It's all done through a lot of collaboration. It's a really collaborative space that I'm in, requires a lot of different types of expertise. And so here's some folks, including a lot of my students, who have contributed to the work I'm going to show you today. And so I hope that at least some of you have heard of this term that's recently been kind of popularized or introduced, this idea of the critical zone. And it's critical in the sense that humans and most animals and on Earth rely on the material at the near surface that stores water, that transmits water. It impacts our food, it impacts our water supply. And so we've given this space on Earth a name, and it's from the top of the canopy to where groundwater is actively circulating. That's like a loose definition. So it includes our soils and weathered bedrock, and I'll introduce that to you in a moment. But there's been this cool, I don't want to say revolution, but kind of change in how the earth sciences approaches hydrology, because we've recognized that there are processes happening over a long range of timescales that all integrate to impact our current water resources. And so my research is really centered on how, legacy impacts of past climates or how current impacts of land use affect how water flows through the subsurface and into our channel networks, or supplying water to our groundwater system. So we're thinking about these long time scales that affect topography, that affect the weathering of bedrock, and how those play out when we think about where rainfall ends up today. And so, like I said, this is a critical field to, it has a lot of applications. I'm on the more foundational kind of fundamental science side of it, but we strive to create these direct connections with people who are thinking about, water resources, food, the fate of ecosystems. And you'll see today I'll talk about drought mortality. And so there's a lot of applications to the kind of science that we do in my research group. And so you've likely been introduced to this concept of high resolution topography data from things like airborne laser mapping. And I'm showing here a really cool image of vegetation. It looks like a photo. It's not, it's just a colored image, different species from a LiDAR flight that was done over this watershed. There's a photo in the background of that same watershed. And so we are now at a time when we have really high resolution topographic data, really incredible records of, the ground surface and how its morphology changes at high spatial resolution. So we can make a cross section of a hill slope that looks something like this, where we can map out the canopy structure and we can map out the topography. And what hydrologists are interested in, or what I need to know to understand how watersheds might change, or how water resources or water in the channel system might change in response to, say, changes in precipitation patterns, I need this part of the subsurface that's not really colored in here. um, I need to understand how long water can be stored, whether that water is available to plants, what happens during an intense rainfall event, whether water is going to flow on the surface or in the subsurface. And so I kind of purposely left this cross section totally blank because generally hydrologists have very, very little information about how water is stored in the subsurface. And so when we slice through a landscape like these, I'm just showing pictures of, these are places that I happen to work or have done intensive like site-based studies. When we slice through these landscapes, we don't really know what we're going to find, but we do know that there are going to be some layers. And of course, if you've driven and seen road cuts across Texas, across the Southwest, a very familiar sight is to see very thin soils, sometimes barely even visible soils, and then a lot of rock. And the rock is variably weathered or altered. Maybe some of it you could excavate with a shovel, but a lot of it probably requires blasting of some kind to create the road cut that you're driving next to. And so this is a very common observation that we see rock underlying soils. And actually here on the right is a picture from a field site nearby in Dripping Springs that we've been working at in Central Texas. And so it's a pretty common thing to find roots in rock and rock underlying soils. And our groundwater recharge that happens in Central Texas and across much of the Western US happens through this rock. So water's flowing through the rock until it gets to a place where it can pool, where the rock is no longer permeable. And then that water runs off into the stream channel. And so when we ask this question of, or when we go back and look at these images and think about how watersheds are changing and how we might predict the watershed response to change, we know instinctually that the water storage in this material that I'm showing pictured here is going to be key. How this material transmits and stores water, and how that responds to climate change, land use change, changing the vegetation, for example, from logging or conversion to agriculture, how those things impact storage in this region or transport in this region, we know is going to be important. And so we've seen that play out in a couple of different ways at large scales. There was this very long drought, the millennial drought in Australia, that impacted many, many watersheds, and there were different time scales over which the watershed returned back to normal state after the drought. So return to normal meant that for a given amount of rain, they saw a given amount of water in their streams. Many of the watersheds, quote unquote, never returned back to normal. Something happened. There was a state shift in the watershed, in the subsurface. Something not visible to the human eye at the surface changed to where you input a certain amount of water and you don't get any stream flow. And the drought had some role in that. And so now, and this is one observation of several that has driven hydrologists like me to think about how the subsurface is evolving in response to drought. And so the same story I can tell you about the Sierra right now in California. The amount of snowpack that was present this last year following an extreme drought or 2 drought years in a row did not yield the same amount of runoff that would have been expected previously. And so my team is working on this specific problem and what role the subsurface played, or the evolution of the subsurface played. So this is another very practical example of, okay, so what is going on? What do we need to understand about watersheds to be able to predict change?